Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast with my guest today, Steve Barton from Translator. If you like what you hear today, be sure to follow the show, like it, review it, share it aggressively with everyone you know. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates. Today's episode is brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee. Stop by their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's in Big Y on Memorial Drive, or go to metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Hey, here's a little old-timey history lesson for you. Back before the internet gave music away for free, back when musicians used to get paid for their work, one of the best ways to discover new music was to walk into a record shop and listen to whatever the store was playing while you rifled through the bins. It was a great strategy back then because you got to hear the newest stuff first, but more importantly, rather than be ridiculed and judged by the record store clerk for the things you were about to buy, buying stuff that they were choosing gave you, the customer, instant credibility. It worked nearly every time. For example, in 1986, I was in my favorite record shop when the clerk slapped on Evening of the Harvest, the latest record by the San Francisco band Translator. Now, in fairness, I had no idea what I was listening to at the time. I was, however, fully aware of the band's 1982 hit, Everywhere That I'm Not. But I didn't know this new record at all, but I liked it enough to buy it, and the clerk, who was prone to harsh judgments, offered none this time around and seemed to be validated because I chose his pick of the day. As it turns out, it was a solid purchase, and so was buying their first album, Heartbeats and Triggers from 1982. In fact, all of their records were worth buying. But the one that I bought that day in the record store in 1986 would be the final album that they would make together for 26 years. Because you see, on July 12th, 1986, Translator would play their final concert together at the Farm in San Francisco. And while there would be a handful of occasional reunions over the years, including in 2012 when they released their final album together, Big Green Lawn, the members of Translator would go their separate ways. Guitar player Bob Darlington released some music of his own, but then became a published author. Bass player Larry Decker and drummer Dave Sheff continued to play together for many years to come. But guitarist and lead singer Steve Barton would go on to release 8 terrific solo albums. In fact, Steve has just released a great new compilation of singles that he's released over the last 25 years called Juggling Lightning, the Singles Collection. Meanwhile, Liberation Hall Records has just released the first commercially available release of the band's final show together from 41 years ago. The album is called Beyond Today, Live at the Farm, San Francisco, 1986. And it's amazing. And it's not just a great document from an historical standpoint, it's also a great snapshot of a band that was and continues to be worth talking about and rediscovering. Interestingly enough, the story behind Translator, and particularly of Steve Barton, is absolutely fascinating, as you're about to find out, especially the parts of the story that happened prior to forming the band. To talk about all of it is singer, songwriter, guitar player Steve Barton from Translator on Baxie's Musical Podcast. To start things off, I want to show you something that I picked up about 39 years ago. It was one of these record store impulse buys. It's Evening of the Harvest.
Yeah.
One of these records where the record store guy is playing it in the store, and it was like, oh my God, this is a great record, and I wound up picking it up. And I know it would be like your last album for like 26 years, but it was like one of these things where I wanted to show you this because, one, I wanted to assure you that you're going to be in good hands today. And the second reason is it winds up leading into a lot of things we're going to talk about today. First of all, tell me a little bit about this particular album. It was the last album before you guys wound up breaking up.
Yeah, and also before I say anything, I just want to say it shows the importance of record stores too. That you walked in and they were playing it, and you said, "Oh, I want what you're playing." Well, I mean, that's really cool.
Well, how many times did that happen when you walk into a store and you're rifling through the bins and all of a sudden they're playing something that you like? I almost feel like it ingratiated you to the record store clerk that you're coming up to them with something that they chose as opposed to the judgment you'd face with the stuff that you chose.
Right. Yeah. But I just wanted to get that in there. But the Yeah, that you were asking just kind of how that album came about.
It is the last of the first four albums that you
Yeah.
guys would do. Just tell me about the time of the band and what was going on with you guys at the time.
We had made the album before that, also produced by Ed Stasium, was called Translator, and that was a really cool record. This one, Evening of the Harvest, we wanted to go in and play it as live as possible in the studio, not necessarily just set up and it's one take and it's live and that's it, but we wanted to get the kind of the energy, I guess, of our live shows down on record. So we did most of it pretty live in the studio, but then would go in and put some overdubs on here and there.
Well, the interesting part about this is so this tour, the final show of that tour, has been released by Liberation Hall Records, live at the Farm, San Francisco. If it's not the last show, it's pretty damn close to it.
Right.
At the time that this show is happening, I mean, did you realize this was going to be the final show, or that the arc of this band was starting to end?
Right. Yeah, at the time for the Farm show that's on the Liberation Hall record, we thought we were breaking up. We thought that's it, we're done, and so let's have a big blowout. I think we billed it as Last Dance or something like that with Translator. And, as it turns out, we did get back together through the years here and there. It was essentially a long break. But at the time, we thought, that's it. We're done. And we went into kind of with that mindset. And so we kind of played our asses off, because it was like, we're not going to do this again. Let's go for it.
Obviously, Liberation Hall Records, one of the things that they do is they've done a lot of curating old, lost performances, and they've got a gigantic stack of these incredible tapes. When you're hearing it again, all these years later, what was your reaction to that performance? Did you feel like that it was something really special, or did you feel critical about it?
Well, I had kind of forgotten how sort of powerful the band was live. The master for this was a cassette that was recorded by our sound person, Floyd Solders. Knowing it was going to be the last show, I guess he decided, I think I'll document this. And so I think we all had the cassette, but I went through my archives here and found it one day and listened and went, whoa. And so sent it to the other guys and said, hey, digitized it and sent the files off and said, hey, there's something here. I haven't heard this in a while. And we all agreed that it really captured that night. It really, the energy is there, and the audience is incredible, and you can hear them kind of throughout. They're completely with us, and so there's more songs than are on the record, because we played for a long time, and you only do so much, and but we chose what we thought were the best ones, and then Liberation Hall heard it, and they've been really enthusiastic about getting behind this, so we're really pleased.
Obviously, cassette tape doesn't necessarily last very long, and the quality of it does not necessarily last forever. How much damage had to be restored over all that time?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, we sent it to a guy that I work with. He's worked on several of my solo albums. His name's Michael Smith. He's in London. He's an incredible engineer. And I said, hey, look, this is going to come out. It kind of sounds like a 40-year-old cassette, and that's cool, sort of, but and some of the songs for some reason were too fast. Like the song would be in F sharp and it would be almost in G, and it would just like weirdly made it almost not sound like chipmunk singing, but it was everything gets sped up then. So it also kind of weird. And I thought, well, that maybe it's cool, but can we slow it down to be the right tempo? And so we managed to get everything where it was supposed to be. And then he was able to tweak sonic frequencies and stuff. I'm not an engineer, but he would make it sound not like a decrepit cassette. And we did have to do a little work for that.
You mentioned about the power of Translator as a live act. You do get the sense of that, even in spite of all the technological things that may have gotten in the way of making it sound, like a pristine copy of a live recording, but it really does capture the energy that that band had. I mean, it's really pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and cassettes anyway, just by their nature, they sort of compress the sound, and they sound great anyway. So it sounded really good,
Yeah.
just coming out of the box, so to speak. But then when it got enhanced, it really, really sailed.
Obviously, most people are going to know the band from Heartbeats and Triggers from 1982, especially Everywhere That I'm Not. But
Right.
I was listening to an interview that you had done, and I actually thought this was actually even more impressive. Your early introduction to music came at a very, very young age. I like 6 years old, 9 years old, and you start not only playing piano, drums, guitar, you're also recording stuff at a very young age, and in fact had a publishing deal by the age of 14.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine what I was doing at the age of 14, and it wasn't negotiating production or
Right.
publishing deals.
Well, it's funny. I had a band called The Present Tense when I was 11, and I was the drummer. And we signed or almost signed a record contract with Sidewalk Records, which was Mike Curb, who was a well-known guy in the record business. Um, I guess heard our demo or something. I don't really know how that all came about, but he was like, "Wait, they're how old? Oh, I want to put this out." And so we recorded two songs, one called Lost, one called Illusions. I wrote them with the guitar player, and it never came out because one of the band members' parents wouldn't let them sign the contract. So we couldn't just sign anyway, or kick him out of the band, and that wasn't in our consciousness. And so it never came out. And there were two versions, one with studio musicians and one with us playing it. And the one with studio musicians is on the tail end of my first solo album, which is The Boy Who Rode His Bike Around the World. And there's a little bit of the song Lost at the end of that with the studio musicians. And I will say this, I was talking to someone through Warner Chappell Music, and the person who clears Mike Curb's or Sidewalk Records stuff now, if anything ever gets licensed, I got their name and I called them. I said, "Hey, listen, this thing came. Do you have the original tapes?" Or trying to figure out if I could get them. And they said, "No, we don't." But I said, "Oh," and there were studio musicians on one version, and I don't know who that was. He goes, "Well, all I can say is the only people we ever used was the Wrecking Crew." I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, that's good enough for me." It doesn't sound like the Wrecking Crew, but
No.
he says that's the people they used. So I was like, "Okay, that's good enough for me."
I heard the recording, and then I heard you talking about that it might have been the Wrecking Crew, and the idea that the Wrecking Crew was recording music for 14, 15-year-old kids blows my mind. But
Yeah.
when you think about it, I mean, of course they would have done it
Yeah.
that way.
But then what happened after that? The band broke up really soon after that, and so I was like, "Oh, what am I going to do now? I'm like 13," and so I was writing songs. I had switched to guitar, and I was writing songs, and a tape of those early songs got to a friend of my parents, who's had a great name. His name was Bill Rainbolt. I always thought that was a great name, and he gave it to someone he knew at ABC Dunhill Publishing, and they were like, again, it was like, "Wait, he's 14? Oh." And so they signed me, and I had a publishing deal with them for, I think, 2 years.
So, I mean, were you able to do anything with that? Did you get stuff
Yeah,
published?
I mean, they never got any of my songs placed with anyone, but they were trying. I remember I went down to, they wanted music for some kind of a sitcom at the time, and they didn't use any of my songs, but I did give them songs, and I wrote songs. I remember writing a song that I thought this will be for Tony Bennett. And I wanted to take advantage of having this publishing deal. And also, interestingly, I never told any of my friends at school that I had this deal. And then one of them found out once. I remember we were sitting, I think it was at recess, and somehow it came up, and they were like, "Wait, you have a publishing contract?" I was like, "Yeah." I think I was kind of embarrassed because the publishing company wanted me to write teenage bubblegum songs, and I was at home listening to Doors records. So I was like, well, can't I do all these E minor sad songs? So
So
yeah.
just out of curiosity, how much were you getting paid at 14 years old with a publishing deal?
It was an advance on royalties of $25. I think it was a week. It must have been a month. I doubt they'd pay me that a week. But I will say this, for a 14-year-old kid, it was a small fortune.
Sure it was.
Yeah.
So as you're doing this and you're starting to write songs at a very young age, by the time that you are in your early 20s, now you're in a band. I mean, how many of those early songs were you able to use early on and say Translator or bands leading up to that?
Well, Lost, which was one of the first songs I wrote, was in the early Translator sets when we were a trio. And it's on the Omnivore collection of our demos that came out, because it's on our first demo tape as well. So we did record that, and that's literally the first or second song I ever wrote. So that's the only one from back then that survived. There's bits and pieces from some of those songs that have showed up in my songs.
It's funny that you had done stuff with Omnivore, because in a way, Omnivore and Liberation Hall kind of do very similar things. Yeah. And I'm just going to name drop Cheryl Pavelski, who owns Omnivore, is a friend of mine from college. So I've known her since we were 18 years old. So I have great respect for Cheryl and what she does historically to kind of curate stuff that would have been lost otherwise. It's amazing.
She's incredible and really important in that whole world.
Yeah. So you started Translator off as a trio between you, Larry, and Dave Sheff, and then you bring Robert Darling into the band. He's another guitar player and another songwriter. Did you remind him that you had a publishing deal at 14?
I let it drop in there sometimes. No, I mean no.
Because I would have held that over his head. We go, oh, that song's nice. You should have heard what I did at 15.
That's good. Yeah, 14. I was No, it was when he came in the band. We, like you said, we were a trio for the first about 9 months. I don't know how long it was of the band, and then we wanted to expand the sound a little bit. And what happened was there was a wedding of a friend of our mutual friend, and they wanted a Translator to play there. I think it was Translator, or maybe it was a jam. I don't know, but we were going to play, and we wanted to play "Cry for a Shadow," the Beatles instrumental that we'd end up recording later. But we needed another guitar player for that. So we had seen him, Robert, he was in a band called The Lies, who we used to play with sometimes, or I'd see them at clubs. And he was crazy. He'd wear like a bathrobe on stage and be walking on the tables and kicking things. It was great. And so let's ask him. And so he came to rehearsal, and he had seen us a bunch of times. He was a fan. He wouldn't mind me saying that, but he was a fan. And he had seen us a bunch of times as a trio. So he came to this rehearsal, and we learned "Cry for a Shadow" in about as long as it takes to play it. And then we have like 3 more hours, that we booked here at the rehearsal studio. So he already had heard all our songs and kind of knew them. So why don't you learn? Oh, here's Optimism, or all these songs that we had. And it was like, oh, shit, I guess now we're a 4-piece. And so it just sort of happened very organically, which is cool.
You guys got a couple of lucky breaks early on. I think one that I think was pretty important was to sign with 415 Records and Howie Klein. And what's fortuitous about that is really kind of 2 things. First was that 415 bands on that label were often being used by Bill Graham as opening bands to other acts. So your exposure was pretty significant. And I assume that Translator was no different. You probably opened up for a good number of bands in that arrangement.
I mean, the biggest one was when we opened for David Bowie, which was at the Oakland Stadium. Yeah, it was us, the Tubes, and Bowie. And that was pretty incredible. We actually couldn't stay for his show. I saw the first couple of songs, but we had a gig that night in Santa Cruz of our own, so we had to pack up and leave. And then, interestingly, I thought, oh, well, we got to go. Let's go backstage and get our stuff. And the guy was like, no, you can't come back. Your pass is only for, you can't come back now when the headliner's on. We're like, well, wait a minute, but my stuff's all back there. No. But we knew someone who said, you know what, come on. So we were able to get our stuff and go to Santa Cruz.
That's amazing. But the other part of 415 that was actually pretty important is that they had a pretty strong distribution deal with Columbia Records,
Yeah.
which I would assume that when you're coming up with your first album, that's a really big deal because in so many situations, it's like
Yeah.
smaller labels just don't have the ability to distribute the way, they had with Columbia. That had to be a pretty important thing for you guys as well as everybody else in that label.
Yeah, and we'd never been on any other label, so we hadn't had the experience of either putting our own single out or being on a little indie label, and so I kind of only knew what it was like to have Columbia Records doing your stuff. That being said, we still had a lot of freedom because we were on this indie label, even though it was part of Columbia, or CBS at the time it was called, but the labels had a Columbia label with also the 415 logo, and I'd look at that and go, man, that's I mean, Bob Dylan, I just like the Birds. It's like I see that Columbia label, it's like, wow, that's really cool.
So by the time you guys released that first record, and Everywhere That I'm Not is the big song. It's the signature piece for Translator. In a way, it's kind of a weird single for 1982, and the reason why that is there's jazz chords being played in a new wave song, which I think is really kind of interesting. It sounded like no other song at the time, especially since you're in 1982 when bands are just starting to incorporate synthesizers and less jangly guitar than you guys were doing. Tell me a little bit about that song and making it the single for that album.
Right. We were always kind of eclectic in our types of songs we do, and we literally used to do Girl from Ipanema in our set, and not ironically, not as a joke. We'd do it and then go into our punk version of She's Leaving Home, and then a heartfelt ballad. We wanted to do everything. But that song in particular, Everywhere That I'm Not, I had this book at home at the time called Ted Green's Chord Chemistry. And he was this guy, this kind of jazz guitar player, I guess. And he would have like 4 pages of how to play an E minor chord, different inversions, for example. And so a lot of the chords in that song are just weird shapes. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to use that in a song. And then it just sort of like the E minor in that song is like, you play the E minor 7, like not like this, like you usually would, but it's like this. And it just gives it a different sound. And then the A minor instead of this is right next to it. And it goes, so it has that B. So it's like, I thought I saw you. So it goes between those. So I thought, oh, well, that's cool. And once I had I thought I saw you, I thought I heard you, and the sort of senses kind of thing. The song fell into place really fast.
It's an incredibly unique song, and it's like one of those, and it's one of those songs that I had known it when I bought that record in 1986, but I didn't realize it's the same band because they sound so different. But yet that was really an 80s anthem that I remember playing it in college radio when I was hanging out with Cheryl.
I'm well aware that that's the song I will be remembered for, which is fine with me.
Yeah. Why wouldn't it be?
Steve Barton, he's now everywhere that you're not, or whatever it's going to say,
That the first couple of records were produced by David Kahn, right about the time that he was starting to work out a pretty amazing career. You mentioned Tony Bennett; he won a Grammy producing Tony Bennett. Paul McCartney and Stevie Nicks. He wound up having a great career moving on. What was it like to work with him? At that point in your career,
it was great. We were all kind of starting out. He had done a bunch of records, but we were all kind of at that same. Oh wow, this is this new. Well, it's our turn now. That kind of feeling, which is, by the way, as an aside, how I felt when I saw Talking Heads on Saturday Night Live. I remember thinking, oh, these people are my age. Oh, it's our turn. It felt really good. But then when I saw them at the Roxy Live as a 4-piece, that was fucking incredible. But David was like a real kindred spirit. We really were all on the same wavelength. And I forget how it came about that we worked with him, but he was one of the first people that we met when we moved to San Francisco from LA. This was like 1980, I guess. and brought us in the studio. And three of the songs we did on our kind of demos with him were ended up on the first album. It's Everywhere That I'm Not Everywhere and Necessary Spinning. And we did a couple of other songs that didn't make it on the record that were also really cool songs. One called Different Time and one called, I forget what it's called right now. Another one that was a really cool song. But they didn't make it on the record. But the demos were so strong. So it was like, oh, this is cool. We worked really fast. And the first album, he had a mobile truck outside our rehearsal studio, which made us really comfortable. And that was really nice. And then we finished it in a studio. Then the second album we did in a studio, the whole thing.
So by the time the last two records come out, now you're working with a guy like Ed Stasium, another guy with an incredible resume. And you mentioned him, already. Between working with David Kahn and Stasium, what was the main difference between working with the two?
Well, there was a lot of similarities, but at the time, I remember we didn't have like an issue with David Kahn. We just wanted to try something new, try something different, and Ed was actually suggested by the label, and we were like, okay. We had talked to some other people who were like, absolutely not. This is not a good mix, and I remember one guy came up to my place in San Francisco wearing like a black like kind of jumpsuit, and he was like talking in all this sort of like record biz ease, and it was like, dude, you are not on our wavelength at all. It just wasn't happening. And so we said, yeah, we'll meet this Ed Stasium guy. And oh, he worked with the Ramones. Okay. Oh, he was the engineer on the first Talking Heads album. I don't really even have to meet him. It's kind of like he's the guy, but sure, we'll meet him. But that was, for me, that was the ticket in. And then he was also the engineer on Midnight Train to Georgia. So it was like, okay, this guy, he goes deep.
Yeah. And he might know a thing or two.
He might know a thing or two. And he did. And he sure did. And the cool thing was we recorded in San Francisco and then went to New York. He lived in New York at the time. We went to New York to do overdubs and mix. And that was incredible. We stayed at the Mayflower Hotel, and then we'd walk to the studio on 48th Street. And that was amazing.
So after the end of that record, I mean, like we talked about before, you guys did break up. You did have that final performance in San Francisco. Yeah. What was it that caused the band to kind of fracture and fall apart by that point?
Well, I think the stereotypical going in different directions answer maybe, and I think we were all sort of maybe wanting different things from the band in a way musically, which for a while served us well because that tension is good. But in retrospect, maybe you say, hey, let's take 6 months off. Why don't we go do some other record, or maybe I'll do this and we'll come back together. And in essence, that's what we did, but it was 7 years off. But but we did take a huge break. I think we're just going in different directions.
But it was all pretty amicable. I mean, you guys have stayed, good friends the entire. I mean, it's nice to hear because I mean, how many times do you hear of a band they think they can't even talk to each other or be in the same room? That has not been the case with you guys.
Right. Yeah. No, we don't all live in the same state.
Right.
So I don't know if distance is good, but no, we've remained friends. Yeah.
You've also had a pretty impressive solo career. In fact, I think you've released, I think it's 8 albums, including last year, Time Hard One, which very much like a lot of your other solo stuff has this great moodiness to it. And there's a great vibe to it. And it's also a collaboration with Scott McCoy, who, played with REM and Fresh Young Fellows. He's been on the podcast before. He's just a really, really cool guy. Tell me about collaborating with him and about the friendship you guys have had.
Yeah, he's one of the first people I met when my wife and I moved to Portland, which was 9 years ago. And we moved here from LA. And I was at a show with Wesley Stace, John Wesley Harding, a friend of mine. He was doing a show here. And we had moved there like 3 weeks before, moved here. And he said, I said, I don't know anybody. I just moved here. And he said, do you know Scott McCoy? I said, sorry, Wes, I don't really do your accent. But And I said, no, he goes, oh, you must meet him. So he introduced me to him. And Scott knew who I was. And I, you know, we had met, I think we had met before in the 80s. And we just hit it off. And then since then, he's been played on several of my records. And we've written a song together, which I haven't recorded yet, but it's really good. And I will record it. And no, it's been great. He's been kind of opened up the world of music world here in Portland for me also. It's
Yeah.
been a really good friendship too.
He
He's a great guy with his wife.
he also did the liner notes for the Juggling Lightning collection, which is
Yeah.
out now too. It's a collection of singles. I hear you did a great job with it. Tell me a
Yeah,
little.
it's yeah. I'm sorry. The liner notes will be. There's going to be eventually a physical version of this singles collection with CD. I don't know if it'll be vinyl, but definitely CD. And for people who still want CDs, and I guess there are some, it'll be there. And maybe we'll post it also because people should be able to read his liner notes are great. They're hysterically funny, like he is. He's great and erudite and clever and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that reminds me that we should post those liner notes. So thanks for that.
No, but no problem. I just wondering how many baseball references he threw into those liner notes.
Um, I don't think there's any in the liner notes.
But
He
in
gives
every
me shit for
but
he gives me shit for being a Dodger fan, but that's okay.
yeah, well, in everyday conversation, I'm sure he drops a few. But how did you go about picking the songs for this collection?
Well, it was the idea was the singles from 2020 to 2024, and that's several songs right there, including the holiday one I did, which is Scott and Peter Buck on guitar and Debbie Peterson singing, and it's a nice, and Dave Sheff on drums. It's a really nice band, and Peter's on a couple of other songs too. So those were chosen, and then there's some people I work with in the UK called Delta PR, and they kind of helped me out with some stuff over there, and it was the guy Mal who works there who suggested doing this collection. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, let's have a little preview of an upcoming record. So there's two songs, one called Mysterious Creature and one called Fallen Hard for You, that'll be on the next record that is getting finished up now. It's going to be more of a loud, kind of more rude rock and roll record, even though Fallen Hard for You is a ballad, but the rest of the songs are all like loud guitar songs. And then he suggested Mal putting on Dandelion, which is my Stones cover from the Triple album I put out a few years ago with Pete Thomas on drums. And also Translator re-recorded Everywhere That I'm Not 2 years ago, I think, and Ed Stasium mixed it. And he said, well, why don't we put that on too? So I said, well, only if it's called Translator. I don't want people to think I'm suddenly billing myself as Translator because
Right.
I'm not. And so that's on there too. So it's a really cool collection, and it came together. It was the singles, then a couple more songs to kind of round it out.
I mean, it sounds like this is like maybe the busiest. I mean, apart from the year you released a triple album, this sounds like an incredibly busy period for you. I mean, the live record, the record that came out last year, a singles collection, and now you're almost at the point where you're about to release a new record. I mean, how are you even sleeping?
Well, did I mention there's also another record that's finished, which is like a very stripped down. There's drums on I think two songs, but it's talk about a moody record. It's a very vibey record, and I really like it. That one's called Letters from Nowhere, and that's gonna. I'm thinking about putting it out simultaneously with the rock and roll record, maybe even on the same day or something. I wanted something to shake it up a little bit. I started writing another song yesterday that I really like. So yeah, I just keep going.
So when do you expect those records to come out?
I don't have a timetable yet. The rock and roll one needs drums. I don't think we'll all be in the room together. I think it'll probably be on my existing tracks, but we'll see. It could be that we end up in the room together, but that'll be done this year, although it's already probably fall. It takes a little while for stuff to get, and then I really want to play some shows around all that stuff and do like a career retrospective kind of show. I think would be good at this point.
Well, it's an impressive amount of work all in 1 year. I have to give you credit for all of that. Most people would just kind of drips and drabs, but you're blasting it all out in the course of 12 months. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
Steve, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I wish you best of luck with all this stuff. I can't wait to hear the new stuff, and I've enjoyed Translator, like I said, for the last 40 years. So it's a real pleasure.
Pleasure talking to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Steve.
All right, man.
The name of the new Translator album is called Beyond Today, live at the Farm, San Francisco, 1986. And the name of Steve Barton's latest is called Juggling Lightening, the singles collection. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. You can always email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.